Welcome to the Mediate Your Life podcast. I'm your host, John Kenyon. On this show, I guide guests through conversations at the intersection of empathic communication, conflict resolution and transformation, mindfulness, consciousness, and trauma healing. I'm joined by leaders on the cutting edges of these fields for conversations that are deep and warm, personal, and nourishing. The Mediate Your Life approach helps people bridge differences and heal divides. Each episode is about learning and about the healing of our world. With love and compassion, I'm John Kenyon, and this is the Mediate Your Life podcast. Here we go. Wow, Leigh Marz, thank you so much for coming to have this conversation with me. I'm really looking forward to it and just appreciating our connection and that we can talk about what we're going to talk about today. So welcome and thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
We know each other in various ways, but professionally, you've worked in a lot of work with organizations, institutions, agencies, doing collaboration and leadership work, which relates very much to the things I do with communication. And I think there's a lot of overlap too around conflict and how conflict comes up in those settings and how you've navigated that. But particularly, we're gonna focus on the book Golden that you co-wrote a while back, and as a something very interesting that you kind of chose to focus on, a book about silence and to write a book about silence and how well that was received and all that went into creating it and how that could be a touch point for us to talk about a lot of meaningful things for what's happening in the world right now with a lot of noise, a lot of just navigating so many different challenges on so many levels. And one powerful lens is about like where silence and spaciousness and connection is missing. And just that window of the lens, really, the lens of silence is fascinating. And I think for a lot of people ended up being that way. So anyways, if you would maybe starting, if you want to say anything about your background, but how it relates to coming to writing that book. And then we'll kind of give people a framing or a context that way. And then we'll get into some questions really, talking about areas of conflict and things all related to that in the world right now.
Well, like you mentioned, I was in the midst of a lot of collaboration consulting. I just call it that because I really don't know what else to call it. I'm really interested in different organizations, especially cross-sector groups that come together to work on a shared problem and of meaning. And so I've worked with groups trying to remove and reduce toxic chemicals from our products in our homes and our world and environment. And those people come from all different walks of life. And there's lots of opportunity for conflict and friction and whatever. But there's also a shared vision that they have of lessening the impacts, the negative impacts of these toxic chemicals. So there's a lot to lean into, as there's also a lot of opportunity for misunderstanding in those conflicts and, kind of having your mind already made up in terms of the way to approach. So I was doing all that work and a lot of other work, working with NASA on some communication issues that they have for many years, and loved it completely. Was noticing overall that there was sort of with all the urgency that those kinds of issues, whether it's climate change with the NASA group or toxic chemicals, there was a pressurized environment where the tendency was to speak more, even speak more loudly, do more data, PowerPoint presentations, have agendas more packed, less time in between to connect as humans and all these other things. That was just the trajectory. Over those 20 years, I just felt it just only increase. So it was sort of hitting, even though that work remains meaningful and important to me, but I was noticing where it was just sort of breaking down, even with the best of intentions. And at the same time, I was introduced to Justin Zorn, my co-author, who was who had been a legislative director for 3 members of Congress and in DC. So he was in a very loud environment that was also, in his experience, just getting louder and louder and louder. So the noise levels in both of these well-intentioned, super important environments, and the conflicts that were arising, the point and counterpoint, arguments that were going on endlessly, we had both reached the end of our ropes with that, or felt that way, felt pretty hopeless, and like, what are we even doing, and how are we even contributing to any solution to these seemingly intractable problems? When we were introduced by a friend, and we had this beautiful conversation, really just about kind of consulting and general stuff. And then we landed on this shared interest of a topic of silence, and silence as a strategy for breaking through all that noise and finding novel solutions to these seemingly intractable problems. We were just getting to know each other. We had never met in person. And so we decided to write an article together, which was really leaning on Justin's strengths as a young, super, productive article writer. He had done, I think, dozens and dozens of articles by then. So I said, that's interesting to me. And he said, let's write something together. I didn't even know people enjoyed doing that or that people allowed for that, so we jumped right in. We pitched an article to Harvard Business Review because we wanted something pretty mainstream and not woo-woo at all. And we pitched this idea of silence. And to our surprise, they said yes, without any parameters or guidance. They just said, yeah, write about silence and strategy. And so we did. We probably gave a really smart, I can't even remember the title, like something, probably too many words and a colon and some other things, and they retitled it to "The Busier You Are, the More You Need Quiet Time." And I think that accessible title and the timeliness and the density of everybody's lives filled with noise, it went viral, which gave us pause. Like, we've never had that happen. He never had that happen. I never expected that to happen, especially in one of the first articles I've ever written. And so we took time to pull back and listen to what this might be indicating. And then we, as you know, the answer to, we decided to write this book together and really explore the science and the spirit of silence and all the myriad ways we can find it as individuals, as teams, as families, and even as a society at large. So,
and that was, the book came out when is it again?
So it's actually 4 years exactly that the hard copy came out. So May 22nd, 2022, and then hardcover a couple years later, and then it's coming out and has come out in many languages, and 15 total so far that it'll come out in. Yeah.
So it sounds like it's been surprising in a way how people have responded to this theme of silence. It's just almost in mysteriously just like cutting through something where people just kind of say yes to it, and in some ways that seem that even took you by surprise. How people are responding.
Yeah, this didn't really come from like our thinking about silence. It was really about leaning into silence and learning from people who, not one of them would ever say, I'm an expert in silence. There are no experts in silence, which is so fun, makes it so much more interesting a topic to explore, like including, and especially us, I'd say, are not experts on silence. And also the flip side of that, you write a book about silence, you're going to write a book about noise. Never in the time that we've been on this journey, which I started in 2016, so started 10 years ago, has anyone said, oh, noise, like what noise? What's the problem here?
Right, yeah. No one doesn't get that problem with noise, yeah.
Yeah, you didn't have to like really assert the problem statement here. It's like so apparent. And just to give a little bit of shape to that, we decided to look at auditory noise that comes through our ears, informational noise that come increasingly through our screens. And the amount of information, of course, is like, multi-fold from times previous. an internal noise. So it's, that external auditory, external informational, and internal, how that translates, and the interplay between those noises, that type of noise, and how they beget one another. And they're all on the rise. It turns out we did a lot of, deep research that, your listeners can dive into on really the state of, the impacts on our bodies and our minds, on our spirits, you could argue as well, for all this noise clamoring for our very, very precious attention and limited attention. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how silence, and even in tiny little, moments, can help clarify our consciousness and get us out of, the solutions as we saw it aren't up to the problems we were facing, and I think we all face, might not be solved by more thinking and talking. That really, it's the spaces in between that may lead us to the solutions we're yearning for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from our beginnings as human beings, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and then to what it's like now in the world. I was just, as you were just speaking now, I had this association to Eckhart Tolle, writing and speaking a lot about the now, the power of now, and which has been, something meditation and mindfulness people have been talking about forever, and but somehow, and people, I remember hearing the story of him saying, people kept trying to dissuade me from focusing on this because it's like, there's like, of course, the now it's like obvious, and right. But he said, that's what I'm really interested in. So I'm going to talk about it and write books on it and focus on it. Right. And he's been a sensation for like 20 years. And almost like with silence, it's similar. It can say, well, silence, like, yeah, I mean, okay, silence is silent. And right. But the doorway that's providing to be aware of what's happening to us as human beings, and what we're needing, as you said, is so precious, that is kind of another way into that awakening, in a way, to what's happening and what we might be able to do. But anyways, I'm just appreciating like the simplicity of, and the surprising kind of doorway that provides, looking deeply and deeply into silence, and what is silence and the need for it.
That's exactly how we began to think and talk about it too, as a doorway, one of many, one of myriad, like you just mentioned, the doorway of now, of presence, the doorway of attention, which so many people are writing and thinking about. There's so many doorways, and we're really, it feels to me like we're all trying to get at the same thing, that is so essential to who we are as humans, and seems to be, at risk, in such scarcity.
It seems our survival as human beings is depending on how we can use these doorways right now. Yeah. So I think you wanted to maybe read a little bit from the book, to give just a little taste, and then we could use that as a springboard into some interweaving themes that we'll go deeper into. Yeah.
That sounds good. Just to get us in the field of the book more directly, I suppose. This is chapter 1, An Invitation. What's the deepest silence you've ever known? You can trust the first memory that comes to you. No need to overthink it. As you remember the experience, see if you can settle into it. Recall where you are, what's happening around you, and who, if anyone, is present. See if you can summon the atmosphere, the quality of light, the mood in the air, the feeling in your body. Is it quiet to the ears? Or is it the kind of silence that comes when no person or thing is laying claim on your attention? Is it quiet in your nerves? Or is it the kind of silence that lives deeper still, like when the turbulent waters of internal chatter suddenly part, revealing a clear path forward? take a moment to consider what might sound like a strange question. Is the silence simply the absence of noise? Or is it also a presence unto itself?
Yeah. Thank you. Invoking that quality.
Is there anything, and it's not the case that things leap to people's minds necessarily, but did anything come to your mind or heart about a deepest silence?
Well, what flashed into my mind, images from a childhood where I would go every summer to visit my grandparents in Minnesota who lived on a lake, and magical. Those were magical summers. And what's coming to my mind right now is so many people hearkening back to a time, in the past where things weren't moving so fast and so frenetic. And anyway, but those memories of they come to me pretty often of that place and that time when I was young, and the enchanted kind of quality of childhood and simplicity and nature. So there's the lake, there's the trees, the grass, the just a lot of nature. Especially like in nature, it feels the silence is so rich and full, not just empty, but full of something, that presence, that beauty, that the what is so soothing to the nervous system. So that's where I went when you were reading.
Oh, I love that.
That silence is a way into something that it's so core and essential to being fulfilled in life, maybe, right? To having a good life. If things are too noisy and chaotic, and like the way our world is becoming, we'll go insane, like. So that's what came to me.
Well, it's like always so I have chills as I hear you speak about this, because it's really one of my favorite. And what a beautiful 6 years to get to ask people about the deepest silence they've ever known. I mean, and then get to hear what they say. And these are precious, precious moments that shape us. And you pointed to so much, yes, that of course, like moments in nature and looking at our back to simpler times, our childhood, if they were simpler. I mean, even just moments is fine. But it points to our innate knowing of how to do this. Something we know, some part of us knows how to get to silence, or what it's like and how valuable it is, even if we may have forgotten. And we asked this question to, neuroscientists, opera singers, musicians of all kinds, a man on death row, incarcerated on death row, an innocent man, I should say, on death row, all kind, a wide, politicians, all just, a chainsaw carver, anyway, all kinds, cowboys, all kinds of folks. And they had all kinds of answers. And sometimes they were these nature, early memories, but they were, sort of maybe on a mountain top with freshly fallen snow, but they also might be cacophonous moments of 4 a.m. moment at on a all-night party dance floor, or rafting through rushing rapids, so where it's really loud auditorily. And that's what really helped point us to, we're not just talking about auditory silence, we're talking about some kind of a silence that is just super deep and internal, and the outside circumstances might be quiet, they might be cacophonous, but there's some kind of deep presence. And remembering, I feel my words, remembering and centering. And I just can't even tell you how honored we were to get to hear those stories, to be the story catcher for such beautiful storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in the work I do, I think of, I call the essence, that the heart of it, a 3-chair model, meaning like the two sides in conflict, and the third side of the mediator. And that third side, that third chair is this, to me, represents this quality of presence, but just that it represents something like that we're talking about right now, that
Mm-hmm.
that silence, in say we're being with some kind of conflict, there's a way of holding the space. Sometimes that's phrases used, holding space, right? But that in a way, it's this sense of stillness, and where things slow down, and space is created, right? And then in that, people can actually feel their connection to each other, right? Because when we start going too fast, and when our thoughts are racing, and often those thoughts are very, conflictual. But then when we really slow down, and it's like this dropping into this place that then suddenly is very nourishing, yeah, very like enriching, and then there's this connection that's there. This like we're already connected there.
Mm-hmm.
We lost track of it. We got separated from it, but it's there if we just slow down enough. And this doorway of silence is like, it's a way to also talk about that, how we can kind of hold that for ourselves, but also for others, that sense of slowing down. So maybe I'll just invite you to say a little more about
Mm-hmm.
how you would associate to that slowing down as part of silence, and how that relates to the kind of conflicts we experience, whether it's within ourselves interpersonally, or how we're relating to the larger world that's in so much conflict.
Yeah. There's a speed of, speech. There's a speed of internalized speech, which is even more compressed, and the speed of speech in general. And the speed of silence is somewhere different. And I feel like it jumps us out of that time frame, and it's time uncompressed. And you kind of reminded me of the feeling I had where, how expansive silence can feel. And can get pretty tricky for me to even tell like how much time has elapsed at all in a group. I'm facilitating groups, so it's kind of time is kind of something I need to keep track of. But I do love when we expand time to the point where so much is happening, and who knows what the time is. And space is, expanded as well, and we do drop into some deeper knowing about ourselves and others, and the importance of what it is we're up to in that moment. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of shared commitment going on typically in the type of groups I'm facilitating, so that there's something to kind of drop into. I get to lean into in those places, and they get to lean into, is that sort of shared mission. But what could be our shared humanity? It could be, I care about this relationship, and I care about this marriage, we're in heated conflict. And certainly all of that terrain is quite familiar. So if I and we can step back and sink into that place, there's infinite shared connection. Whereas words kind of just highlight. I love words. We love words. We wrote 90,000 word tribute to silence. We love words, but they're distinctions. They're, creating divisions, and when we start piling them on, they can just become, inflammatory in these moments, in these tense, constricted moments. So the expansion that silence and all the things that become present in silence, our humanity, our shared purpose, our love, our reason for being together, all these things. It just creates this balm and a recentering, and without all the words. And I think that's a miracle. And it's something, again, like I think innately we know that, or we knew that, or we felt that at some point in time in our lives, whether it's with, in a natural environment by ourselves or with other people around. And so we're tapping back into, you could say, that ancient technology that is being hacked like crazy against our will, without very little protection or precaution or forethought about that, or the costs of that. But I can feel the costs of that. You can feel we are feeling the costs of that. And so even, we in the book, we direct us back to some practices that may be just individual practices. That's a starting point for practice where we might have a little bit more of a sphere of control, you know, and then we can look at our relationships where we can maybe come up with some agreements that are unique and different. I'm sure like you have your, in the 3 chair exercise, there's an agreement you're making for a temporary situation, to drop into something. And we can do that do that at home. Like, how about we don't turn the radio on first thing in the morning, in the common space? And how about we take this hike and we talk at the first part, but then are silent on the way down? We can do all these things that kind of help normalize and invite in silence without it being the dreaded awkward silence, which when our daughters were teens, there was nothing more horrific than an awkward silence in their world.
Right.
But invite instead an invited silence where it's not a cold, stonewalled, awkward silence, all the silences that go wrong.
Yes.
But a welcome one.
Yes. Well, I really heard in what you were saying, this a thread I want to follow with you about this assault in a way. It's a kind of a enemy image languaging, but it feels that way, a kind of an assault on our attention and what we can do, and how much of that is very calculated, intentional versus just kind of part of the technology that's increasing and the impacts of it. But actually, before we go into that, you talked about love, and so often silence gets associated in meditative ways with stillness and peace and a kind of meditative calm and the mind really settling and all that, right? And how good that can feel. But that also, I think what we're talking about and what silence also opens up, and you've talked about it, love, that there's a kind of that sense of communal connectedness, and then this certain kind of love that's universal, that's unconditional, that's big. It's a big love that feels bigger than our individual self, right? And that to me is where breakthroughs and conflict happen, where healing of trauma happens. It's not just the empathy and the presence in that, it's also the love and the compassion and the kindness and the caring. And it seems to me silence is also about that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So in contrast, I talked about the sort of the more strict definitions we gave to noise, those 3 types, and we hammer it out in lots of statistics and studies. When we turn to silence and what it is, like I did say, like, silence is a presence unto itself. It's things like that. But there were infinite definitions and routes and ways to go, and it felt important to keep it super expansive. So we turned to Gordon Hampton. He's a recorder of quiet spaces all over the world. He's a sound engineer and artist, and he says silence is the think tank of the soul. Just like, psh, silence is the think tank of the soul. Okay, we'll take that one. Shabda Khan, a Sufi leader here in the Bay Area, said silence is not silent at all. It's teeming with life and joy and ecstasy. And that speaks to it. I guess I would just call it plainly one of my favorite types of silence, because I have some. And then there's a stillness, sort of that peace and quiet. There's a lot of routes for silence to take, and it does feel filled with love for me in so many ways. And whereas it can also feel full of perspective and a little distance, which can feel cooler. Anyway, many we don't even begin. We try, but we don't even begin to uncover all the ways that silence can be. And then it was also, of course, important to talk about the shadow of silence, or silence, we would say, that isn't really, we wouldn't call it a true silence, but the silence of oppression, the silence that has been forced upon you and not your choice. where it's not speaking up, not speaking truth to power and different things. And I do acknowledge probably, my language is not all NBC certified. So please bring your lens in. And, but they're part of why I'm drawn to some of those more aggressive ways of describing it is I really do feel like our attention, our birthright to having pristine human attention on what I care about, what we care about, is at risk. And it's a really, really urgent matter, I suppose. And it feels unconscious at best and deliberate and, ruthless in many ways, just for the sake of making more money, more eyeballs, more clicks, more all the things. And again, it's like, well, what are we losing in this collectively? And then for us to just take stock of what we can do individually and for our families and one another.
Yeah, but the thread I want to follow is this grabbing for our eyeballs and our attention. And yeah, it's really tempting to get angry at certain corporations or individuals or groups or whatever. But even, deeper than that, it's like that's a phenomena that's just happening for lots of different motivations. One you mentioned, money, and the more you capture people's attention and do it in a way that kind of gets to the unconscious and draws people towards certain behaviors that make money and all that. So
and that's our fear, I think, often. Like, here's where I can drop into my more NVC compassionate self. Like, I do see this all as a terror that lives in us, trying to avoid whatever it is we think we'll meet in silence. Whether, the horror of the vacuum, as Nietzsche would say. Was once talking with a woman who was writing a book about death. And she said, "Oh, I'm writing about the big death. You're writing about the little death. Silence is a little death. Like, you're like some pause in all that activity and all that, like, that will bring us to some confrontation with whatever we fear most about ourselves, our lives, our history, our trajectory, our marriages, our, job, or this or that, whatever it is we're afraid to turn to and face." So I really can drop into some compassion for these things. I am a full-fledged participant in this, which is why which is what turned me to writing this book in the first place. Again, was just like, please, like, let's make more space for this. And yet it was, why is silence scary? I think this is part of it. And I can really feel for that, for our scariness, or how scared we are. Yeah. Of what we'll find.
I'm so glad you mentioned that too. That seems like such an important aspect as well, that, all the reasons why we don't go into silence, not just because there's profiteering happening, but that the things we're afraid of and the courage it can take to go to really slow down and pay attention and listen deeply and feel deeply. And then all the things that maybe that our system have, by protecting ourselves, our psyche protecting itself, kind of kept out of awareness and kind of locked away, can start to come up, and that can be terrifying.
Any of your listeners and anybody who's spent any time doing formal meditation, you may think, and I probably thought this, you're going to go try some meditation and you're going to get quiet. But like, what do you come and encounter with? It's just like, oh my God, what's happening inside this mind of mine? It's crazy town in there. It's like the monkey mind, all the things we talk about. It's like, it's just a collision of that. And so, it gets louder before it gets quieter. And that's just using meditation as which is such a beautiful teacher for noise and silence, internal noise and silence, especially, and may or may not end up being our path for silence. It may be a learning portion. Like Justin and I confess that we're lapsed meditators at this time. And that's no shade on meditation, because meditation taught me so much. And we started out this book by speaking with a lot of deep, deep meditators and contemplative practitioners for that very reason, because they know what they're talking about. And then we realized that really we wanted to be able to explore silence in the myriad ways it comes through. For me, silence isn't found in stillness so much, although I can find it in stillness, of course, at this point, but I really find it in movement and in flow states. And in flow states, we look at Mihai's work. What he points to is this point where our attention is so focused, we're doing something that's challenging, but we're pretty darn good at it, and we're like at this optimal place with it. There's no room in our attentional networks to focus on the self-talk, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. That self-reflective thought has to fall away in order for us to do this, to ski down this mountain, to dance in this way that that's what I love, as you know. Whatever that flow state thing is. And it turns out forgetting about ourselves is a pretty delightful experience. That kind of quiet where we forget ourselves, but we feel connected to a larger something. We're a drop of the ocean, but we're part of the ocean. Yeah. That kind of silence. Yeah. Oh, it's another favorite. There's a whole form, a multidisciplinary area of science merging self-transcendent experiences, STEs. And those can be found in meditative states. They can be found in flow states. They can be found in psychedelic states. There's a commonality to these self-transcendent experiences, looking again a lot at flow states in Mihai's work, which has been amazing in terms of looking into this field. We zoomed into the neuroscience, like what's the mute button for the mind, and that chapter, which I thought ahead of time was going to be kind of crunchy, a lot of numbers, a lot of studies, ended up feeling as mystical as the spirit of silence and the humility of the people doing all this research and work. Whereas I thought, like, oh, neuroscientists are going to be they're kind of like gods right now, you know what I mean? And like, well, what's the neuroscience say? There are gods at the moment, but they didn't act that way. They were so humble and so interested in these tiny, we really don't understand that much, but the little bits of what we're learning about how our brains behave in a quiet state versus how it behaves in a lit up, active state.
Oh, fascinating. And as you say that, I think of how much consciousness is becoming popular in places I see information of, just whether it's through psychedelics or it's Dan Brown, who wrote the Da Vinci Code. His newest book is all about consciousness. It's set in a very kind of action thriller, fiction, but he did a lot of research on that was, really based on all the real research that he wrote the fictionalized story from.
How fun. I didn't know that.
Yeah. But it just in a lot of ways, how this exploration now, it's becoming more legit to talk about how is consciousness maybe fundamental to the fabric of the whole universe of reality. And that before was just this sort of non-dual spiritual thing, kind of way out in the fringe and only for the, sort of intrepid in the meditation world. And now it's like non-dual is becoming a more a phrase. It's a little more familiar, and consciousness itself too. Like that word, I think, used to feel very mystical and out there, and now it's being studied scientifically as well as possible, and again in psychedelics. And so I'm curious, just if we want to just linger there a little bit on silence, the brain, and because this idea that the brain is a receiver, it's not the only source of experience. but that maybe there's this relationship between the physiology of the brain and then something larger, that we're in the kind of field of consciousness or psyche, that we're also receiving. The brain is this incredible receiver. So anyways, is there anything else you want to share just on that level related to what we're talking about?
Wow. Well, this is an area of great interest of mine. I wonder if this, I mean, it feels like there is a lot of new, I mean, even Michael Pollan's new book is about consciousness, whereas 2 books ago is about psychedelics. And that's no mistake as I see it. That's just like him doing his work and on the path. And psychedelics are a big part of my own personal practice and looking at consciousness through that lens in particular. And I do it, of course, in all the other ways too. But it's a very effective way for me to get quiet and listen differently and make novel connections and have insights and feel a sense of healing, and to gain intelligence, not just through my brain, but through my whole somatic knowing and spiritual knowing. And, so it's a huge part of my life and area of interest. And yet when we think about it, like what it's happening now, there does feel this maybe mainstreamification of these things, if I can make up a word there. But, contemplative practices, like we humans have always been interested in consciousness, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And some things happened and we maybe cared less and we kind of marginalized it, like you were saying. And maybe so that we're coming back around, because I just don't think there's any way through without a little awareness of awareness. You know what I mean? We just can't do this, without some acknowledgement. I don't know. I feel pure joy and excitement about where things are going, uh, in terms of respect and interest, and studies are fun. I feel like they're often backfilling what we know through spiritual traditions and our own empirical experience, but I'm down for that. It's fine. Of course, they also can show the way on occasion, but they're mostly backfilling what we know and making us feel maybe a wee bit better about what we're doing, if we need that, which we often do.
Yeah. And then there's sort of surprising insights that come in this sort of new, like circling back to what we sort of knew from all the ancestral wisdom and wisdom traditions of human history, but then these sort of fresh insights with these newer lenses we can bring.
Mm. Yeah, like an animism and like consciousness of not just humans, but of all things. I'm seeing a really interesting return to animism in many forms, and the roots of that, of course, indigenous wisdom, all of the above. And yeah, it's a time where we can weave so many different, knowings and learn from so many different knowings, with all this information that is floating around about all of the above. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a time to integrate so much knowledge, and on all these levels, and in terms of silence and consciousness. Yeah, I mean, silence is a physical thing in a way, and yet it's so much about the psyche and the this realm of awareness and consciousness, that then silence is such a important dimension to help us, really, right? As in a way, a need. In NVC we talk about universal needs, like
Universal need.
a need that, it's in a way, silence can be a strategy to meet a need, but then in a way we're talking about a need itself, for what a silence is, or what it's a doorway to, that is a deep need of human beings, that spiritual need. It's a soul nourishment. It's our mind body wholeness that needs it also. Not so anyways, I'm glad we're talking about all that.
Yeah, this makes me want to bring in Jarvis Masters, my dear friend on Innocent Man on Death Row, because his definition, when we asked all these folks, he said, silence is a matter of survival for him, as an innocent man on death row now for 43 years. And so he really was emphatic that this is everyone's birthright. This isn't a privileged. We don't want to think about it as a privileged thing, even though there, of course, there's factors in life that make it more easily accessible, et cetera. But he says, no, he had to find silence in San Quentin in order to survive all of this time, and to steady himself and to find his purpose, and eventually to find his way to Tibetan Buddhism, and eventually to find his way to all the practices that help create silence in his life beyond meditation. And he's a beautiful writer. He wrote 2 books, best-selling, New York Times best-selling books on death row. And more than that, actually in solitary confinement, where he was only allowed to have the insert of a pen to write his book. I mean, it's just an incredible story. So he tells of when he first walked into San Quentin and he felt the walls, which are 4 foot apart, and he felt the ceiling, which is, low enough for him to put his hand flat against. He had this thought as a 19-year-old boy or young man. It's like I'm being buried alive in here. It's like I'm being buried alive in here. And that thought was repeating in his mind. And he, being the brilliant person that he is, knew right away, I have to interrupt that thought. That thought will kill me. Thinking like that will kill me. So he started his mind training early. And it took some time, but eventually found his way to a whole community, wrapped in support for him to find silence, as well as all his practices, which are working out, writing letters, doing all the things to find his silence so he can stay centered as he deals with a system that is completely broken and in no way built to correct itself from its horrific mistakes. So how do you sit with that? I mean, he would say it's silence that saved him. And then, of course, all the beautiful connections and friendships he's made over this time. So there's a both and there for sure.
Yeah, it's such a inspiring story. Imagining kind of being in his place and how to cope and how he's learned to cope and flourish. And as a metaphor, being in a prison cell, in a prison, and the systems that we can feel, that we buried alive in, are going to die in, and this the way that technology and culture is so, and information, the intense flow of information. How do we respond to that?
This is perfect.
Jarvis
Yeah.
did. So something like kind of summing a lot of things we talked about around just the realities that we're in, but that we do have agency, we do have power, and he's a perfect example, actually, of the power you can have.
Yeah,
right.
He is our example, because once we introduce him and kind of dive into his, all of his wisdom and learning in this time, then he shows us, he's really the soul of the book in so many ways. He shows us the way to finding those areas, the sphere of control we have in our lives. Now, his sphere of control at the time he was in death row in San Quentin when we were interviewing him, he, was in a cage 23 hours out of a day and gets some time, an hour on the yard. He can't choose when he showers. I mean, this is a very limited sphere of control, but he would still insist, no, I could find the time to write. I chose to write when all the guys on the tiers were watching sports games and they were completely distracted, and no one was going to be like, hey, Jarvis, yo, Jarvis, this, that, they're watching the game. And so it's loud, you know what I mean? But they don't want his attention. So he could just focus on his writing. And then eventually, actually, he started sharing stories of men's scars. So basically, he started asking about the scarring. When he got quiet enough in his interiority, he started to notice all the scars on men. And he would ask very gently about the stories to those scars. And he says, if it wasn't for the quiet in me, I wouldn't have inquired on this other. And he did. And most men would then share stories of horrible abuse and neglect as a child. And it would just unfurl a whole story of this, these are all men on death row. There's it's intense what got them there, but or what they did. It was intense if they are not innocent like Jarvis, which most of them are not. So you get these stories that could tell so much about what built to this thing. And they, when he was going to publish this, he just told me this the other day, so this is part of why it's coming to mind. When he went to publish those essays, he thought, oh God, these guys are going to freak out if they know their stories are in there. I hope they don't, whatever. Well, it turns out they were like, oh man, I loved reading that. And other people were like, could you tell my story? Can you tell? And he started actually teaching them how to write their stories and helping get them published. Anyway, it's just a beautiful. So now in the tier, or more recently in the tier, when he would say, hey y'all, I'm going to write to the tier, to the tiers of the men. And they'd say, leave Jarvis alone. He's writing right now. Other people like, Jay, they're like, don't bother Jarvis. He's focusing. So this is how relationally he could actually extend his sphere of control to the sphere of influence that he had with all the other people. So even there, he can find the quiet he needs and wants to do what he's here to do. So he argues, of course, that we can find our ways. And what are those little ways? It used to be, one of my confessions in the book is that I was a smoker. And while I'm really glad I quit, what I miss so much are those little moments of pause. They were so beautiful. I was working in crisis runaway shelters. I mean, we'd go out and we just inhale, exhale, watch the smoke do things, and just have these gorgeous moments of quiet, and sometimes of a deeper dropped in conversation. And wow, where is our healthy successor to the smoke break? And so that's the invitation to people, is to find what is it, just getting a glass of water after some piece of work? Is it inhaling, exhaling? Is it listening to a piece of music and moving through the space? Is it going out to even just a tiny little moment in nature, watching a bumblebee kind of, bump around in some flower just for 60 seconds and then come back to whatever you're doing? So looking for these little moments where you can invite silence into your life. And of course, when you can, expanding that to maybe Gandhi took every Monday in silence. And he would not compromise on that. His most loved ones would come in and please just take this one meeting. He's like, well, I mean, if it was Monday, he didn't say anything. So you get the point. And then he would come out Tuesday with this clarity, says everyone around him, and just an incredible teaching. So that there's a really in-depth story about that, which is, can we do some 1 hour version, 2 hour, half day version, whatever it is, with the support of our family and friends and coworkers and all of that, to get a bigger chunk of silence. Gordon Hampton, who I mentioned, the acoustic engineer, the man who records quiet spaces, he keeps to-do lists, and his to-do list got to some ridiculous 20-some page. It was crazy. Anyway, so he printed up that to-do list and took a pencil and drove a few hours to one of his most quiet spaces in the Hoh Valley rainforest in Washington, I think it's called. And he hiked out an hour and got to a quiet spot, and he took out this, gargantuan to-do list and just started striking all the things from silence he could see. No, not that. That's not mine to do. That can be delegated. That, and he estimated, when we talked to him, he got 5 months of work off of his list, folded up his to-do list, put it in his pocket, and walked out 5 months lighter. So, he took a half a day to drive out, maybe a full day, you could say, but he knocked 5 months of work out. So we have time for this. we can find the time for this, that decompression of time happens when we find these silent moments, and so much can come rushing in to meet us besides all the stuff that is rushing and pushing and forcing its way in. So it's just worth it. And it's also, I'll just say one more thing, is just that it's worth it to do this with others. I think, I mean, I'm a social exerciser. I'm kind of there's a lot of things I love to do with others. Shared silence is magnified for me. It magnifies the experience. It's so deepening of relationships. So I mentioned that hike where you might agree to a lot of talking on the way, but then silence on the way down, or, just there's all kinds of ways to just sort of to design creatively with your work, your work folks, or you're starting a meeting that's a big, maybe contentious meeting, that with a little bit of centering on why we're here and what we want to bring to this moment. However, something that just gets us connected to that. Doesn't take long. Like a Quaker meeting does, it sort of centers us in silence. And we speak from the silence. The words that we speak improve upon the silence instead of just cluttering it, or masking it. So, there's so many things that can be done. It's all available. And your listeners will create their own, which is the best part.
Right. That everyone has their own ways, but then there's common ways, and to do it together. Yeah, that communal silence, right? I mean, silence in solitude can be so beautiful, or maybe with nature, but also with other people, but being in silence, or in that spacious, slower, just that sense of being in that space together of silence like that. Yeah, I'm so glad you talked about that, and then empowerment. That's what I really got, and from Jarvis, the story of he and the other things you said, really in different ways point to the power, like something like a revolutionary spirit. Like it's a way to, Gandhi would not cooperate, but in a nonviolent way. You don't have to be violently resisting things. There are nonviolent ways to resist, to not cooperate, and to I think you reminded me in my own life how much I try, and I don't know how successfully, to slow down enough and really listen to what I really want to be doing next. There's the to-do list, and there are a lot of options now. There's like a myriad of choices we can listen to or watch or read or whatever. But what feels like the right next thing? And just having those meditative moments in the day, and pauses, and then that listening for what comes out of that, like the Quaker meeting, right? But what comes from the silence as the thing next to say, or to do, or to not do, and how revolutionary that is to just to do that, to practice that. Because all this pressure to go faster and faster and do all the things we should do and must do and have to do, and all the fears and anxieties, and right, and to just be willing to sit with all of that, and then listen for like, what's the next thing that just feels right. So anyways, that's what I get, that sense, that power that we have. We can choose to do that if we want to. Yeah.
John, what would be, if we were to listen into the silence, what do we feel? What could we sense is next together? I wonder.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's see if there's anything else to say before we close.
I have something that just came through. Just within mind, I feel a little teary. Keeping in mind who is listening to your podcast and the holy work you all do. I'll say to bring silence, to bring some opening to these constricted, hard, fiery, difficult, scary places. I just want to bow to that role, the quiet that you all are bringing, the possibilities that you're opening, and the healing that comes through. It's just so important. So that doorway of peacemaking, healing, finding common ground, all the things you might say, acknowledging the universal and needs that we have, and bringing us back to our humanity. I feel so much gratitude for the work you and your listeners are doing in the world. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you for that. And I'm glad we are ending on that too, like bringing silence into the fire of discord and fighting and arguing and all that's amplifying right now are in that way, and how it is really possible to bring, and maybe what's key to finding solutions and new possibilities is making space for that silence, because like in the silence new things can be seen and created. And so thank you for acknowledging that can be a very difficult place to bring silence, and yet like it's essential if it's really going to be successful to be able to do it. Yeah, so I'm really glad you said that, and for all you're doing to contribute in all the ways you are. So thank you for this conversation, Leigh. I've really enjoyed the sort of silences that we've been moving in and out of in this conversation, and the flow, being in the flow together. So just thank you so much, and with everything that you're doing. Yeah. So all the best, and we'll be in touch. Lots that we'll follow up on and connect more. So thank you so much, Leigh.
I look forward to it. Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to today's conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to subscribe to the Mediate Your Life podcast and follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram at John Kenyon. You can also download the Mediate Your Life app to practice these principles in your own life. With love, empathy, and care, I'm John Kenyon. Thank you for listening.